Welcome to another episode of The Other Guys. Here's an experiment. Get a group of guys together, mention the word big block. 8 out of 10 guys are immediately going to think big block Chevy. Maybe 9 out of 10. But today, we're going to take a look at one of the other big blocks. How about some performance mods on a big block Ford? In this video, we started out where we always start, at the wrecking yard. Now, we were lucky enough to find an early high compression 460. Although you could do these equally well with one of the late model fuel injected 460s. But we found this early model with high compression and we subjected it to the normal modifications. So if you're a mild guy, we got something for you. If you're a wild guy, we also got something for you. On the mild side, we subjected our 460 to the usual performance modifications. We put a mild camshaft in it, lightly ported stock heads, and a 4-barrel aluminum intake manifold. And that combination works real well for a truck or RV, even a street strip Fox Mustang. It would be awesome. If you're a wild guy and you want to go run 10s, we've got a 460 build for that too. We went bigger on the camshaft, bigger in the porting, and bigger on the intake. A single plane with a Dominator. So what did they both make? Let's find out. Before we get to the dyno results, come on guys, make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, push those buttons down there, help me out, tell some friends, get them over here. We're having fun over here. And by the way, unfortunately, this test was run a while ago and I don't have video of the motors running up on the dyno. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make engine noises in the background. Wah! Those are my junkyard special effects. Let's check it out. To get things started, we went down to the wrecking yard and picked up a 460. Now, most of them you're going to find are going to be the late model fuel injected versions in the full-size trucks and stuff, but we were lucky enough to find a real early one for this test. We actually found it in a Lincoln, and this was a 1968 version, so it was kind of cool. The benefit to that is that we had higher compression. So these early ones had higher compression, they had smaller chamber heads, and more compression, more power. So this particular one was in the neighborhood of 10 to 1, and as we would find out later when we took it apart to do some major modifications to it, and we'll get to that stuff too, this one turned out to already have some work done on it. It had 30 over pistons. Now they were 30 over factory replacement pistons, so somebody had gone through and rebuilt this at one time in its life, which is not unusual for something that's a 1968 460. And this is another one of the other guys' combinations. I know that a 460 is not quite in the same league as a 400M in terms of, it's much more popular than that combination. But in terms of big blocks, compared to a big block Chevy, a Ford is definitely an other guy. I mean, the popularity of the big block Chevy is much more than a big block Ford. And I'm not putting it down. I'm just telling you that if you look at sales and stuff, that's a reality. And I don't know why that's true, but I don't know why it's, why that happens, because a big block Ford, as we'll show you here, is a good combination. They are available in the wrecking yards, and you can make lots of power from them, especially with all of the heads that are available for them. I mean, Kazi has stuff, Airflow Research has stuff, obviously Edelbrock, and there's a lot of good head choices out there for it. But anyway, our 460 was a 1968 version, and what we did was put it up on the dyno and run it in stock trim with long tube headers. We also had to put a Holley carburetor. We put a Holley 750 on it because the factory carburetor was missing, as was the factory distributor. But lucky I was able to get one from my buddy Mark Sanchez. Shout out to Mark there. And we got this motor up on the dyno and running. What? So equipped with long tube headers and that Holley carburetor, our 1968 high compression 460 produced 349 horsepower and 492 foot-pounds of torque. So as you can see, even though this thing is a short stroke and a big bore compared to like a big block Chevy, the combination still was designed to make lots and lots of torque, and it does that basically just because of displacement, because it's 460 inches. So they have put the camshaft in it, and obviously our early motor, even though it is an early one and it's a high compression one, does not have Cobra Jet or Super Cobra Jet heads on it, doesn't have the big valves or anything in it. But it did have a high compression. So this was a good baseline starting point for us. Now let's take a look and see what happens after we made some modifications. After establishing our baseline with our 460 with all of the stock stuff, the only thing it had different was the 750 Holley carburetor and the long tube headers. It had the factory iron intake and factory heads, factory camshaft, factory rockers, all that stuff. So we started to do some modifications to it. The first thing we did was we replaced the iron factory 4-barrel intake, because that 460 came from the factory with a 4-barrel. We replaced that with a Weiand intake manifold,
So let's take a look at that. And that's interesting. The Weiand picked up power past 3,500 RPM, which we expected to. Power went up from 349 up to a peak of 364. Yeah, 364. But take a look and see what happened below 3,500. So if you've got a truck and you're doing towing with it, or motorhome or whatever you might have your 460 in, take a look at the loss down here. I mean, it's pretty substantial. You're talking about 487 versus 452. So that's like 35 foot-pounds. So the Weiand 4-barrel intake did improve power out there, and it feels like it's about 500 pounds lighter than the factory iron intake manifold. But the iron intake manifold was designed to really enhance torque production down low, and that's exactly what it did. So something to think about if you're thinking about upgrading the intake manifold. You got to pick your RPM range. So the next modification we made, and we're going to do a bunch of mild stuff on this thing first, and then we're going to go crazy with it and get a little bit wilder. So the next thing we did was a set of rockers, and as you can see, there was almost no gain there. And what we did was replace the factory rockers with a set of aluminum roller rockers, and we thought, oh, that's definitely going to help. But as you see here, there just wasn't much gain. Now, it looked like it was starting to trend like it wanted to pick up power at higher RPM past 5,500, but through most of the curve, there was just no difference in power. And normally we would expect there would be, because we know that a cam change will definitely make power on these things. But for these rockers, did not work. But the next thing we knew definitely would work. So let's take a look and see what happened when we installed our camshaft. So we put an Extreme Energy 262 camshaft in it, and as you can see, it picked up a ton of power. It picked up power through most of the curve. We even managed to reach right at 499.5 foot-pounds, or 500 foot-pounds, which is a good number. But everybody, I'm sure, is looking at this big drop out here, and what that is valve spring. So we did upgrade the valve springs on our big block heads. We put the specified springs for our 460 or 262 camshaft, and the problem is that there's still not enough spring. So installing the combination, and in truth, it is a combination of two things. It's a combination of the more aggressive camshaft, and and the roller rockers that we put on, because whenever you install roller rockers, they're very heavy relative to factory rockers. So the combination of the cam and the rockers produced a valve float problem. And the reason that I didn't do a valve spring upgrade and cure that is because the next modification I was going to make was a set of mildly ported heads that already had a valve spring upgrade. So basically I just got too lazy, didn't want to do this, because we knew we were swapping the heads anyways. And we're going to show you what happens when we put these mildly ported heads on, and we also cured this valve spring issue, but you'll get to see what happens. Okay, here's the difference between our baseline motor in stock trim with the headers and the intake headers and the carburetor, and then after we installed the camshaft and the rockers on it and the Weiand intake. You see we got valve float, but I didn't want to change the springs because it was a lot of work just to change the springs, because I was just going to have to change the heads anyways. So here's how we cured this. We put a set of mildly ported heads on. When I always say mildly, I mean it's something that you guys would do, I would do even, having never ported a set of Ford big block heads. It's something that we would do. You would just do it intuitively. I mean, you'd go in and just get rid of all the flash in the bowl, maybe make the ports look better by making them shinier and stuff. This was a very minor amount of porting. I think that the thing that helped out the most, as we'll see, we were allowed to rev this thing because we put the right spring package in it in these ported heads. And the guys from L&R Machine, Derek, my buddy down there, actually did these heads, and they did a good job on them. So we'll take a look and see what happened when we installed these ported heads. And you can see that's a really nice power curve. I like that power curve. It goes all the way. We ran it all the way out to almost 600. Again, this is still a mild flat-tappet camshaft. I'll go ahead and put the specs up here because I didn't mention those before on our Extreme Energy 262 cam. But it's a pretty mild cam at like 212, 218, I think is the duration on it. So this is a really good, like, streetable 460 package. And sure, it has high compression, but if you were putting together a 460 anyway, even if you started with one that was originally an EFI mode or something you're running at carbureted, you would probably put a piston in it. So if you put a piston in it, just put a piston in it that's going to raise the compression. If you do minor porting, and honestly, I don't even think you have to do the minor porting. It's going to help a little bit here. But what I would do, and we didn't do this on this one, is if you wanted to get the extra power and not port the head, I think you could switch from the Weiand 4-barrel intake to like an RPM air gap. I think an RPM air gap would make more power than the Weiand does on this combination. So if you have a good head and a cam like that, a mild cam, because that's something that you could just drive around with. You could see it didn't really lose any power. The power that we lost down low was from the intake manifold, and you still have that with the RPM air gap. So that's a combination I would put together. This is a good combination with the Weiand intake and that 4-barrel carburetor and the ported head on our stock short block. That worked out well. Maybe try the RPM air gap if you want to try that. If you don't want to do the ported head, so maybe trade those two and get the same thing. Now let's take a look and see what happens when we basically throw the kitchen sink at it. Okay, we're gonna basically upgrade everything. We're gonna make a lot more power, and to do that, we basically need a lot more of everything. So I'll show you what happens when we do that. When we left our combination, we had run our mild 460 forward from the wrecking yard, and we had done a camshaft upgrade and an intake upgrade and a cylinder head upgrade, all basically on the mild side. The camshaft was pretty small. The intake was a Weiand dual plane. We had already had the 750 Holley carburetor, and then we installed those very mildly ported factory heads and picked the power up to 437 horsepower, and torque was up over 500 foot-pounds, which is nice, 507 foot-pounds. So that was a good jump from the 350 horsepower and 492 foot-pounds of torque that we had run with a stock one. And that's a good way to go on our mild combination. But we wanted to go even farther. So we wanted to show somebody what could be done to really get a lot of power out of a 460. And what we did was, we didn't go the whole stroker route, but what we did was took everything apart, took our short block down to the guys at L&R, and I had Derek bore it 60 over, and then we put a set of flat top pistons in it. The thing cleaned up nice, and they had the guys had a 60 over flat top piston with valve release in it that allowed us to run even more camshaft, because that was really the key. The short block prep was kind of minor compared to what was going on, but we put that flat top piston in to bring the compression up. We also got in contact with our buddies at MPG, who are the Ford, Cleveland, and 460 specialists. I met these guys during the Engine Masters competition, and there's some serious hombres. I mean, when they told me that they were doing a 410-inch 8.2 deck Ford, I thought, that's the most foolish thing in the world. And then I saw it, I saw what it did, and I'm like, that's the most awesome thing in the world. So they're great guys, and they know what they're doing. I told them what I wanted to do. I said, look, I'd like this 460 to make 600 horsepower. They said, okay, no problem. And you want to do it with the iron head? I said, yep. They said, okay, I'll give you our 460 cylinder head porting and our 460 600 horsepower head and cam package, basically. And all you have to do is take that head and cam shaft, put it on that 460, and especially if you've got a flat top piston, if you put a good single plane intake manifold on it, it will make 600. And if these guys tell you that it will make 600, it will actually make 600. So what we did was we took them at their word. I sent them a set of iron heads. They ported them up. They sent me a flat-tappet camshaft, which was kind of a solid flat-tappet camshaft, which was awesome. And we put that on, and we installed it with a single plane intake manifold that we had on one of these big crate motors from Ford Racing. So it was an Edelbrock single plane intake. And here's what happened when we installed that package. And the cool thing also is that the Edelbrock intake manifold, that Super Victor Jr., whatever it was, I'll have to take a look because it was made for Ford Racing. That was set up to accept a Dominator carburetor. And although it really didn't need it at this power level, having a Dominator on your Ford 460 is like super awesome. So equipped with that cylinder head and camshaft and intake manifold, the power output of the 460 jumped to, as they said it would, over 600 horsepower. It produced 609 horsepower, and peak torque was up by quite a bit as well. 557 foot-pounds of torque, and I'll make sure that I put the cam specs in so you guys can take a look at how much camshaft it was. It was a healthy cam, and as you can see down here below 3,500, we're definitely going to trade power compared to the very mild stuff that we had in the very mild combination. So if you're choosing between these two, there is a choice between the two. You have to look and say, hey, look, I want that, and I'm going to be doing that with it, with gear and whatever that you need. Or I'm going to do the other one, and it's a mild combination, and I don't need this kind of power. I don't need the extra 150 plus horsepower. I'm more interested in having the torque down low. So that's why I'm showing you these two combinations, and it goes to show you that even the other big block, this Ford big block, can be made to produce either one of those things and really anything in between. And as we'll see later on, I'll do another video later on down the line and show you how we go up improve the power output 50% from here. And because this is a good combination, but there are ways to get even more NA power out of it. So let's get to our conclusion.
What did you guys think about our other big block buildup? I mean, I like the 460. Personally, I think it's a good combination, especially with all the aftermarket heads that are now available for it. I mean, Airflow Research, Kazi, Edelbrock, Trickflow, I mean, all the guys have cylinder heads for them, and they all work really well. So you can make a serious 460. There's still a lot of them in the wrecking yard, especially the late model EFI ones, and if you're going to change the heads and the cam and put pistons in it anyways, you can make the compression whatever you want. But on our combination, I purposely wanted to stay with the stock heads, especially on the mild build, because the guy already has that if he goes to get it from the wrecking yard. And you can do a little bit of work yourself in the porting, put a mild cam in it, put an aluminum intake. Although, how did you like the difference between the aluminum intake and the factory intake? The factory does a pretty good job making those things work at low RPM. But how about that wild combination? Big single plane intake, Dominator, big camshaft, fully ported heads. Those guys at MPG, they're the real deal. They know how to make horsepower. But if you want even more power, let me know in the comments. I've got some big stroker versions, over 500 inches, all the way up to the 557 stuff. I've got some Kazi headed stuff. I've got some Trickflow A460 headed stuff. We've got some big power. Let me know if you want it. Thanks for watching.